Hi, I'm Patty. I'm so excited to be here right now to talk to you guys about my job and how I got to where I am, my journey of becoming a nurse anesthetist. So I knew I wanted to be a nurse since I was in 8th grade. I just didn't know what kind of nurse I wanted to be. There's so many different directions you could go in our field. And I was privileged and honored to be accepted to Villanova University School of Nursing, where I came and had a great education, one of the best nursing schools in the country you could be at. You guys are so lucky. Things have changed dramatically too, because I remember being in St. Mary's basement in our sim lab with 4 nurses huddled around a tape recorder listening to breath sounds. So you guys are pretty darn lucky with Driscoll Hall. Very lucky. Good for you. Utilize it, learn from it, do everything you can to advance yourself and your career. So, graduated from Villanova with my bachelor's in nursing. The summer between junior and senior year, I did a nurse externship at a hospital in Philadelphia. I really didn't know what I wanted to do in nursing or what kind of nurse I wanted to be. So that summer, I did a nurse externship, and I think when I graduated from nursing school, just the level of comfort of being familiar with that hospital, I took a job there. I worked on a neurosurgery floor for 6 months after I graduated Villanova. It was great. It was a great experience. I loved it. The neurosurgical patients are very challenging, and I'll never forget a patient. You're going to go along in your career, and there's going to be patients that you will never forget. And I will never forget Mr. G, who was shot in the head, who was one of the first patients I took care of as a graduate nurse. And he couldn't speak, but he could move, and he still needed a lot of nursing care. Every weekend, I would come back from my beach house in Avalon, New Jersey, and talk to him about my weekend, and I did this, and I did that, 22 years old. And one day I said to him, I'm tired of doing all the talking. When are you going to talk to me? And he looked up at me, and he said, right now. So that was one of the first fulfilling moments in my career as a nurse on the floor. After 6 months of being on the neurosurgery floor, I wanted to do more, so I went to the emergency room. And the emergency room was awesome. It was fast-paced, it was trauma, it was really sick patients, really sick medical patients, where I was able to really think and utilize everything I learned in nursing school. My clinical skills, my critical thinking, my nursing assessment, my nursing care plans. Yes, you do use them after you get out of school. And it was a great experience in the emergency room. I stayed there for 3 years. After the ER, I just decided that I wanted to do more. I wanted another step, and I didn't know where I wanted to do or what I wanted to do. So in the ER, patients get prepped for the operating room. And at this point, I did not know what a nurse anesthetist was. And I would always see these people coming in the ER in lavender scrubs. And I thought, who gets to wear lavender scrubs? They're so cool. Like, who are these people? And they were nurse anesthetists. And they would pre-op the patient, and they would take them to the operating room and do everything a nurse anesthetist does in the operating room, which I will get to. So I thought, maybe I'll apply to anesthesia school and just see what happens. I had a plan B in case I didn't get into anesthesia school. So I applied to anesthesia school. The requirements were a Bachelor of Nursing, nursing license, and at least 1 year of critical care experience. And the ER I worked in counted as critical care because it was basically the knife and gun club, and we put lines in and we opened chests. So it was a critical care ER. So my experience in the ER counted towards anesthesia school. I applied to anesthesia school, but I had a plan B because I knew I was leaving the ER. Even if I got rejected from anesthesia school, I'm going to go and do something else. If I didn't get an anesthesia school, I was going to go to Penn and work in the MedStar helicopter. So, had I not been accepted, this conversation right now would be completely different. But I got accepted to anesthesia school, and it's a 2-year program. They kind of ramped it up a little bit now. I think it was 24 months when I went, and now it's about 27 or 28 months. I went to anesthesia school. It was 2 years. I learned everything about anesthesia you can imagine. A nurse anesthetist takes care of every aspect of the patient going to an operating room, preoperatively, intraoperatively, and postoperatively. Again, I got to utilize everything I learned in nursing school. Physical assessment, clinical skills, critical thinking, everything I learned I was still using even in anesthesia school and when I graduated anesthesia school. I graduated anesthesia school and took my first job at Lankenau Hospital. That was 29 years ago, and I'm still doing this, and I'm still loving my job. 29 years of a nurse anesthetist. So what do? What does a nurse anesthetist do? Okay, so we work in all areas of the hospital. We work in the main operating room, we work in the surgical care suites, we work in the endoscopy suites, we work in the electrophysiology lab, we work in cardiac units, we work in interventional radiology, we work in the delivery room and the obstetrical department. We work everywhere in the hospital that anesthesia or sedation is required. So what do? We give anesthesia, we give general anesthesia, we give just sedation, which is called monitored anesthesia care. We give regional anesthesia, which is spinal, epidural, interscaling blocks. We give, scaling block. We work in conjunction in the hospital in the state of Pennsylvania with a captain of the ship. So in Pennsylvania, we are supervised by a captain of the ship. The captain of the ship could be an anesthesiologist, it could be an MD, a DO, a dentist, a podiatrist, a GI doc. So in Pennsylvania, we have someone, I don't want to say overseeing everything we do, but there's somebody who's there if we need them. The nurse anesthetist is the primary caretaker of the patient. We administer the anesthesia. We once again use our critical thinking, nursing assessment, nursing care plan to treat and take care of the patient throughout the whole procedure. We do, I said OB, we do cardiac, we do NICU, we do interventional radiology. So all these cases, the nurse anesthetist is the person putting the patient to sleep, making sure that their arms placed properly so they don't get nerve damage when they're laying there for 12 hours for a cardiac ablation, for atrial fibrillation. I hope I'm not talking above your heads, but all these things are things that you have to be responsible for, and that's my job. I'm responsible for that, and I love it, and I love what I do. Another thing that we have to do is keep up with the changing times. So in 29 years, you can imagine, things have changed in medicine. We rarely now do open gallbladders. Now they're done laparoscopically. Now there's a robotic procedure that we do for certain cases. All these things have changed over time in medicine. And what you're doing now, in 29 years, there's going to be new techniques and new things that you're going to have to keep up with and learn. And that's what we do along the way. As a nurse anesthetist, we keep up with all the changing times in medicine, the new drugs, the new procedures, the new places we have to go. And it's just such a fulfilling thing. It's so rewarding and fulfilling for me to do this. Like I said, there's going to be patients that you'll never forget, and there's going to be patients that you won't remember. But when you give anesthesia, you're the last person they see and the first person they see when they wake up. So you're the last one when they go to sleep and the first one when they wake up. And because of what I do and the drugs we give, it's almost like a thankless job. Nobody remembers us because we give them Versed, which makes them forget. So when all these glowing letters come into the hospital about the patient's care, don't ever expect to get one for anesthesia because we're the ones that make them forget. So it's really interesting. It's such a fulfilling career that I just love, and I can't say enough about it. So when you start off as a nurse anesthetist, you're going to be taking call. Most likely you'll have a call position. I did that for 10 years, and then I had children and decided to stop taking call. So the things that you see when you're on call are things you may not get to experience during the day. The middle of the night emergencies. We responded to cardiac arrests and we would intubate the patients. So all those things happen when you're on call. And I feel, as a brand new person out of college, you should do all those things to get the experience. You should work really hard. Take on the hard patients, take on the hard shifts. Do all that so that 10 years down the road, if you want to stop taking call and you want to work in a surgery center versus doing a liver resection and pumping 10 units of blood in, you have that choice. You have that experience under your belt. And that's what I do now. I pretty much work in the surgery center of the hospital and other surgery centers that our group affiliates with, and I love it. I do knee scopes, I do cataract surgery, I do little hand surgeries, I do gallbladders, but you know, to get to that point, I wouldn't start at that point. I would go right into it, jump right into the experience that you can get, because then you're going to be comfortable with everything you do. And don't be too hard on yourselves. It took me 6 months to a year after I graduated Villanova to really feel comfortable in what I was doing, and that's exactly when I was making that change from the floor to the ER. So that 6 months started all over again. I'm in the ER. Oh no, now I need to get comfortable again. And then I graduated anesthesia school. It took me about 6 months to a year to feel really comfortable and really confident in what I was doing. But it's going to come. Don't give up, because you will gain that confidence. And the more that you do and the more you experience, you're going to gain that confidence. So what do you need to be a nurse anesthetist? Like I said, a year, at least a year critical experience. Some schools require more. I know Villanova has a program, great anesthesia program. Some anesthesia programs require a minimum GPA to apply, or you have to take the GRE. And you need your bachelor's and, of course, your nursing license. Some states, you will be the sole practitioner. If you move to the Midwest, there will be no anesthesiologist. There will be no captain of the ship. So each state has their own regulations on nurse anesthetists. If you're in Kansas, you may be the sole practitioner giving anesthesia for that hospital. So there could be a lot of responsibility depending on what direction you want to go in. I did bring some pamphlets. They're up front, from my anesthesia association, and I did bring some airway equipment if you wanted to look at. We intubate patients. We have other devices we put in their mouths or their throats to keep them alive and breathing. And it's just, I can't say enough about what I do. I just love, love, love my job. And nurse anesthetists basically are the guardian angels of the operating room. That's what people call us. And I'm proud to be one of those. So, thank you.
Thank you, Patty. And definitely grab a pamphlet before you leave if you're interested. And also, they're over time at the end for questions. So our next speaker is John Messing. John Messing is a nurse practitioner with the Center for Trauma and Critical Care at the George Washington University Hospital in Washington, D.C. He completed his BSN at Villanova in 2007 and his MSN as an acute care nurse practitioner at the University of Pennsylvania in 2010. He is a member of the Eastern Association for the Surgery of Trauma and currently serves on their Advanced Practice Provider Workshop Development Task Force. As a member of the Society of Trauma Nurses, John serves as the Advanced Trauma Care for Nurses Executive Committee and the STN East Conference Planning Committee. John has been a member of the Board Certification for Emergency Nursing, Trauma Certification, Registered Nurse, Exam Construction Review Committee since 2014. He serves as an instructor in Fundamental Critical Care Support, Trauma Nurse Core Curriculum, and Advanced Trauma Care for Nurses. John serves on the GW Patient Safety Committee and in August was elected to his hospital's Medical Executive Committee by the physician staff as the only non-physician on the committee. Along with one of his colleagues, John created GW's first advanced practitioner transition to practice program for new NPs and PAs interested in trauma and critical care, which successfully graduated its first class last month. John was recently selected to receive the Society of Trauma Nurses inaugural Clinical Nurse Excellence Award to be awarded in 2017.
First, thank you again very much for inviting me here today, and I'm very excited to see such a great turnout of future nurses, current Villanova students into this auditorium. A little bit about my background. When I was here as a student, I was one of those people that constantly was signing up and doing like almost every single activity, and just have always found a way to keep myself busy. I never really had a free moment, which was kind of a blessing and a curse, but it's created a lot of great opportunities and relationships, and that's kind of what you'll see in terms of where my career path has taken me. So when I graduated from Villanova, before I graduated from Villanova, I participated in a nurse externship at the University of Pennsylvania in their medical intensive care unit for the summer between my junior and senior year. And that actually ended up becoming the first job I took out from school. So I never really thought I was going to be a MICU nurse. I didn't exactly know what that entailed when I was applying for a nurse externship, but the recruiter at the time was like, "You look like a MICU nurse." So I started there, and it was a great experience. I still think those are some of the sickest patients I've cared for anywhere. And after spending some time at Penn, I ended up enrolling in their MSN program for the acute care NP, and did that part-time while working full-time. If any of you guys are thinking about doing that and the work-life balance and the challenges that come with it, it's difficult. It's a huge sacrifice, but it is also doable. So I finished that program and decided I still wanted to work as a bedside nurse for a period of time, and joined the ICU float pool at New York Presbyterian. And that's where I got a lot more critical care, or a lot more surgical critical care experience. Between that experience at New York Presbyterian and my NP education at Penn, I really decided that trauma and surgery was kind of in my future. I took my first job as an NP at Georgetown, working with their liver transplant team, which was a very, very valuable experience. And one of my messages to you guys today is going to be that no matter where you go, even if it's not that perfect job, there's something that you are going to learn and you're going to carry forward for the rest of your career. Every single day you're going to learn something new. And although that patient population was great, and I really enjoyed working with them, the job itself was not the best for me. And so when a position with trauma opened up, I ended up moving over to GW and starting with their trauma services. And what I've learned with all these experiences is that often the best opportunities end up coming when either you're too busy and are doubting whether or not if you can take them, or it seems like it may be coming a little bit too soon. And you have to really ask yourself, am I ready for this? Or is this the best time for me to be taking on this new challenge? And I'm not selling this to you in the sense of, take on more than you can handle. I'm more so selling this to you is that your education here at Villanova has prepared you to handle these challenges. And you may not feel ready at that point in time to move into a new role, a new world, a new hospital, or sign up for some new responsibility, but believe me, you guys are ready for that. And so being with trauma has actually developed into the perfect position for me as a nurse practitioner. And if those of you who are thinking of pursuing the role of an NP at some point in your career, it's great. I couldn't be any happier than what I'm doing. A lot of my own experiences today, I still draw back to those lessons I learned as a bedside nurse. Even this past week, there was a patient in the ICU that had a variceal bleed and was hemorrhaging and failed endoscopy. They were unable to band. And so while they were waiting for IR, they were trying to put a Minnesota tube down. Nobody knew how to do a Minnesota tube. But because I worked in the medical intensive care unit, I knew how to use a Minnesota tube. And that's not my patient population, but you'll still find these experiences that are going to lend to the rest of your career, how you're able to deliver. So what I like about being a nurse practitioner is that you can do a lot, and you can also, depending on where you want to go, you can also just focus on a very niche population. Currently, as an acute care NP, I spend my time responding to patients in the trauma bay. I see consults in the emergency department and throughout the hospital. I manage patients in the ICU. I first assist in the operating room. I discharge patients from the floor. The only thing I rarely do and almost never do is go to clinic, which I'm actually okay with. It's great because my current position, you're able to function to your fullest capacity. And there's a lot of reward and a lot of value in that for me. If you're thinking about pursuing an NP career, I will recommend to you, think about what kind of nurse practitioner you want to be, and really think about those experiences you've had in nursing school with different rotations, and those experiences that you have in your first nursing job. Because as you know, or you may or may not know, in 2008, there are these new consensus guidelines that were put out there, and they're really advocating for nurse practitioners to practice within the population that they're trained. So if you really enjoy primary care, if you enjoy working with the entire family in that entire spectrum, an FNP is a great career where you're going to be able to you could even practice autonomously and hang up your own little plank outside of your office, depending on which state you're working in, and have that experience. Or if you like the hospital, the acute care setting, looking into that acute care NP role. And depending on how you define those consensus guidelines, there's plenty of gray area. But that's just something to think about in terms of your future. The other lesson that I've learned is that really find those key mentors in your life and in your career, and spend some time with them. Whether for me, it's a surgeon that I work with who truly values nurses and nurse practitioners, and is there as somebody that I can go to day in, day out, has helped me to become published, has helped my career to get advanced, and is just a excellent resource. You may not have that in your first career, and if that's something that is missing, don't be afraid to reach out elsewhere, or even keep an open mind about other opportunities that will become available for your own growth in your own career. There's a lot that you can do as a nurse, and there's even more that you can do as a Villanova graduate, and I'm excited to see how you guys grow in your own careers and hopefully connect with you out there. Okay.
Thank you, John. Our next speaker is Dr. Ross. Dr. Ross is currently an assistant professor here at Villanova. As many of you know, she got her BSN, MSN, and PhD also from Villanova. She's worked at Doylestown Hospital in the critical care unit and has experience on the telemetry unit at Chestnut Hill Hospital. But I'll let you go into more detail about your career.
Okay, thank you. So I know a lot of faces out there, which is really exciting. It's nice to see you in this setting instead of necessarily in the classroom. So I, much like our first speaker, kind of always knew I wanted to be a nurse. My mother was a nurse, my aunt was a nurse, my grandmother was a nurse. I think it was probably in my blood. And when I was applying to nursing schools, my kind of backup if nursing didn't work was education, elementary education. So I found a way to actually combine them both into an awesome career that I love. So I did end up going straight into the telemetry unit when I graduated from Villanova. Ironically, I thought I wanted to be an OB nurse when I was here. I absolutely loved my OB rotation. I thought it was phenomenal. I remember sitting at this career day panel when I was a senior and a nurse midwife spoke, and I said, oh my gosh, that's what I want to do. That just sounds so neat. And then I went and started interviewing for jobs, and this position on this telemetry unit was available at Chestnut Hill, and I said, all right, well, let's try it. It's probably good to get some general experience. And I just fell in love with it. And the next logical step from there was to go to critical care, which as an undergraduate, if someone had told me I was going to be a critical care nurse, I probably would have laughed because that was not my favorite rotation. But once I went into the critical care unit at Doylestown, I really enjoyed it. I love the adrenaline rush. I love the fast-paced environment in the ICU. So within about, I would say, 6 months to a year of being in my first position at Chestnut Hill, I was working evening shift, and there was a group of nursing students that were on an evening shift rotation on the unit where I was. So much like you all do every Monday and Wednesday, they would care for my patients and I would help them and work with them, and I loved it. I never in my life thought I would be a nurse educator. I remember my advisor my senior year saying, you should think about nursing education. I think you'd be really good at it. And I said, oh, thank you, that's very nice. And you know, kind of moved on into the telemetry unit. And when I realized how much I enjoyed working with these students in the clinical setting, I said, all right, I need to think about this. This is obviously something, this is happening for a reason. So I did apply here to get my MSN specifically in nursing education. And once I got my MSN in nursing education, I did start teaching on a part-time basis, both in the lab and the clinical settings. And I knew that once I started down the nursing education trajectory that I really wanted that to be my life. So I knew that I was kind of in it for the long haul in terms of education. And within a year and a half of getting my MSN, I did come back to get my PhD because that was what I wanted. I wanted to do this full time. I really wanted to be a nurse educator and have that be my full role. So I got my MSN, much like John was saying, while I was working, except I think I did the opposite. I worked part-time and took classes full-time. But it's a balance, but it's doable. It is definitely doable. And I started having a family when I was in my PhD program. Again, a challenge, but it was doable because I wanted to keep my career moving. I wanted to keep the trajectory moving. So I got my PhD in 2011, and I've been fortunate enough to be here at Villanova full-time for 2 years now, and I've been here on a part-time basis since 2006. So I've gotten to meet lots of students, and I love what I do every minute of the day. I am so happy that my path found me because I don't really feel like this was the path I would have sought out, but I'm glad that the path kind of found me in sort of an inadvertent way. So as an educator, what I get to do is obviously teach within the classroom. So it's important, although I do not work at the bedside anymore in my own practice, as educators, we really need to stay very on top of what is happening in the clinical setting because we need to make sure that we're teaching you what's happening in the real world. What are those changes in technology? What are those changes that have happened in the last 29 years in evidence-based practice that we're seeing in clinical so that you're prepared to work in today's healthcare environment? So really staying on top of what's going on and really staying on top of our own practice because, of course, not only do we teach in the classroom, but we are out in the clinical setting and we're with you guys at the bedside taking care of patients. So being aware of the new medications and the new treatment procedures and all of those kinds of things. As a full-time faculty member, especially a PhD prepared faculty member, another piece of my role is within research. So education often has sort of a dual focus, not just educating students to get you ready to be nurses, but also to build the science of our profession that your nursing care is based on. And as a lot of you know, I'm sure, most of my research focus is specifically on nursing education because this is my love. So I want to know that what we're doing to teach you is actually the best way that we can teach you, that we're using the most current methods and we know that the outcomes are going to be positive, that we're not wasting our time or wasting your time, but we're really giving you the best education that we can. So now I'm working both in the classroom and the clinical setting and then also engaging in research to support what we're doing in the classroom. And like I said, I just think it's a great fit. If anyone has an interest in teaching, if anyone has an interest in research, it's something to think about, moving forward. It's not the kind of career that you're going to go straight into, when you graduate in May, but looking at it down the road, thinking about as you start working with patients, if you really love that patient education aspect, if you have nursing students on your unit and you love working with them, if nursing research really kind of piqued your interest when you took it, think about, looking into nursing education, kind of down the road as you move into your career. So thank you very much.
So our last speaker today is Sharon Reiveness. Sharon is a registered nurse with over 20 years of experience. She earned her Bachelor of Science in Nursing from Villanova University and a Master of Science in Nursing from the University of Pennsylvania. She has an extensive nursing leadership background in acute care setting. Sharon began her clinical research career as a monitor for PPD and then subsequently as a project manager for both Covens and Omnicare. She joined Janssen R&D, J&J, in July 2006, working for the immunology GI clinical team. Last year, Sharon advanced to Associate Director, Program Management and Clinical Program Management Leader in Oncology.
Okay, good morning. It's wonderful to be here today back at Villanova. And I understand that this evening our basketball team is playing Penn. So I don't know if there are any fans out there, but I am hoping for another championship this year. So at any rate, I thought when I was about to graduate that, and as I was beginning my career, I had a very fixed idea about what I wanted. And I guess, how many seniors do we have here? Okay. So anybody want to talk about what it is they want to do? Come on. What are you thinking of? It's almost December. Go ahead. Pardon me? Oh, wound care. Very interesting. Very interesting. And that is a very defined career path. Well, when I graduated and started my career, I thought there was nothing more that I wanted to be was a neurosurgical clinical nurse specialist. And I really wanted this. I started out at the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania, and I worked as a new graduate in the critical care units down there, their SICU and their neurosurgical ICU. And I was astounded at the level of care that these patients required and how sick they were. And I absolutely loved neuro. It was a new frontier to me. So I spent several years in critical care. I worked at HUP, and I'm from upstate Pennsylvania, Wilkes-Barre. And I worked at Wilkes-Barre General Hospital in their surgical ICU, and it was a massive culture change. I had no idea, after having gone to school here and then worked in an urban academic medical care setting, what a community hospital setting was like in upstate Pennsylvania. But one of the things that I really valued in my critical care experience there was I was really able to develop my physical assessment skills even more. And it was interesting because when you did not have in-house staff, residents, interns, whatever, on whom to rely to substantiate some judgments or to make decisions, the attendings relied on me. If I were on evenings or night shift and a patient was going down the tubes in the unit, I would call them up and say, there's this patient that has rales or rhonchi in the right base, they seem to be retaining fluids, etc. And all of those interventions that were ordered for that patient were based on my assessment. So I really, while it was a big culture shock, and I was kind of surprised, in some ways it was more responsibility than what I had in an academic medical center setting. I really began to develop those skills. So I worked also there. We had surgical patients as well as neurosurgical patients, and again, loved neuro. Knew I wanted to go back to graduate school. And in those days, and this is going to sound almost prehistoric, in the state of Pennsylvania, there were only 2 graduate programs in nursing. University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and I believe it was Duquesne out in Pittsburgh. So I came back to school and I went to Penn, had some amazing experiences in graduate school there. I worked in a seizure clinic out at Medical College. I did some of my clinical there. I was linked up with some neurosurgeons at Jeff and saw patients with them. I also took the freshman neuroscience class in the med school at Jeff as part of my graduate program, which was really cool. And the other thing that I did, which was really interesting, I got hooked up with the neuropathologist when I was in graduate school at Jeff. So what we would do is I would meet with him on a weekly basis before he would dissect the brains, and we would review the case together, and he'd say to me, "What do you think we're going to find?" So I just couldn't believe that I was getting these experiences. So right as I was finishing graduate school, one of my classmates said to me, "You know, I'm working part-time as a nursing supervisor at Pennsylvania Hospital. And while I was in graduate school, I had been doing what we called then agency nursing. So I was really able to flex my time around my schedule. I worked critical care in various hospitals within the city. And I thought, well, yeah, this will help. I mean, something a little more stable right now. I'd get health insurance benefits. I'd be guaranteed of that. And again, as I was planning for my neurosurgical nurse clinical specialist position. So I took the job as a part-time nursing supervisor at Pennsylvania Hospital down at 8th and Spruce, the oldest hospital in the country, founded by Benjamin Franklin in 1752. And what happened was I stayed there for a little over 13 years. And what I found was I really valued the nursing leadership positions, and I held multiple positions there. My last position there was I was the director of medical surgical nursing, so I was responsible for the nursing care being provided to 280 patients in our medical surgical units, as well as one inpatient psychiatric unit. And what I really valued was I was able to ensure and look at systems for patient care in terms of I was able to promote quality of nursing care, as, again, for many patients. When new technologies were being either purchased or implemented, I was able to help direct in terms of standards of care that would be implemented for those patients. And I really liked it. So while I thought in the beginning this neurosurgical clinical nurse specialty thing would be my thing, I really liked being able to affect the lives of thousands of patients rather than hundreds. And that was the way I viewed it. So when I left Pennsy, I took a position as an assistant vice president with the graduate health system, and which doesn't exist anymore. And this was a very different health system than Pennsy. The symbol of Pennsylvania Hospital is the Good Samaritan. And we were very committed to our charter dating back to good old Ben. And the motto of the hospital was, "Take care of him and I will repay thee." So this was a values-driven organization. And when I went to graduate, I wanted the experience. They actually had converted to for-profit. They had a few for-profit hospitals in their system. So it was very different. And I was able to gain advanced leadership experiences at a new level. I was not only responsible now for med-surg, but I was also responsible for the maternal child line. In addition to that, I was responsible for the women's center, mammography, ultrasound, etc. So it was a great experience. To give you some idea, I was always learning. I mean, there were always different things and different challenges. We wanted to implement an obstetrical residency program at the hospital. And so I got together with our chief of OBGYN, and we took a look and assessed what we had. I had to learn the regulations and the requirement for the medical boards, in terms of the accrediting agencies, in terms of what were required for this, to be able to do this. And then I sat down with the chief and I said, these are our strengths in terms of being able to do this program. These are our weaknesses. This is what we have to do. And so I worked with him in terms of developing a program there, and we got full accreditation, and we were able to bring in in-house residents as part of their experience. So if you had told me that I would be helping to develop a program like that, I'd say you're out of your gourd. I mean, it just didn't fit at all. And then what happened was, we were, at that time, reimbursement for healthcare was really shaky in the state of New Jersey. It was, again, a very different healthcare environment than Pennsylvania from a reimbursement perspective. And we had some state funding slashed. And when the state funding was slashed, my position also got slashed. So I was laid off. And then I went from there, and I went on to get a secured position and advancement, and I became vice president of maternal children's services at a local Catholic healthcare system. It was a great experience, and there were many programs we were able to implement there. But what happened was, we had one OB practice that we did 2,000 deliveries a year, and one OB practice did 50% of those, 1,000 a year, and they were purchased by a competing health system. So once again, I found that my position was cut in light of that. So I was really at a turning point in my career, because if I wanted to stay on this nursing leadership path, I was going to have to relocate. And for me personally at that time, that didn't fit. So I had to think about what it was that I wanted to do. And I thought really hard, and I knew that I wanted to stay in healthcare. I knew that I wanted something that would be stimulating, where I would be working with teams of people that would be hugely important to me. And I wanted the ability to make a difference, to have an impact. And so I was looking at a variety of opportunities, and one of my former colleagues said to me, did I ever think of clinical research? And I had never really thought about this. And I said, well, no, tell me about it. And she had worked at an organization. This was a non-nurse colleague. And she had worked at what was known as a site management organization, which really helps individual doctors in the community to be able to implement clinical trials. So I began to network, and I began to talk to a lot of people about clinical research. And I got connected with another nurse who was very similar background to mine. She had been a nurse manager at a local hospital and ran the dialysis unit, but again, changes in reimbursement, her position got slashed, and she gravitated to clinical research. So she was a wonderful mentor. I got to meet with her. She worked for Wyeth. She'd gone to become a director, which in many of the pharmaceutical organizations is usually restricted to physicians. So this woman had really greatly advanced. And we began to talk about, and she said she uses her nursing skills all the time in clinical research. And we talked about opportunities, etc. So I decided that this would be a good fit for me, and I should look into it. So I started off at PPD, which is known in the business as a contract research organization. And this is an organization that pharmaceutical companies hire to manage either part of their trials or all aspects of their trials. So I started off there as a monitor, which really means that you go out to sites and you verify, you work with docs, investigators, and their staff to be sure they're complying with the protocol. You teach them about the protocol. You review the records to be sure they're complying with the protocol. You make sure the data is collected appropriately, and you also make sure that they're complying with regulations, and most importantly, protecting the rights of the patient. I I then became a project manager and continued in contract research organizations. And I worked on a wide variety of different drugs. And I was recruited about 10 years ago for Johnson & Johnson. So I made the jump to pharma. And one of the things that really attracted me to J&J was it's also a values-driven organization. And in my experience, I had found this was something that really meant a lot to me. When I started off at Pennsy, again, values-driven, I worked for a Catholic healthcare system. That was a values-driven organization. And I had worked for-profit, and I'm certainly not knocking that experience, but I did not find it as valuable as the values-driven organization. And Johnson & Johnson is a company that is over 150 years old, a long tradition there, and they really are extremely dedicated. They were founded by the Johnson brothers and on the principles of their credo, which was really to take care of patients, to take care of babies and mothers, to take care of the people, doctors and nurses that use the product, and then really to help to advance the community at large. So I thought this was terrific. And when I got there, I was assigned and spent the last 9 years working on the GI clinical team. Now, one of the drugs that I worked on was Remicade. Anybody in the audience familiar with Remicade? Remicade is an amazing drug. It is a first-in-class drug that was first approved in Crohn's disease back in 1998. And what I did was, I did not work on the initial, I was not with the company when they did the initial submission, but in my role as project manager, I worked on Remicade, 2 FDA submissions for Remicade. One was for Remicade colectomy, which demonstrated that we were able to reduce the incidence of colectomy in patients that had had inflammatory bowel disease through the use of Remicade. And then I also worked on Remicade pediatric ulcerative colitis. And I feel very blessed to have been able to have had these experiences because we were obviously able to get FDA approvals for those indications. And there are very few people in their careers even that have the opportunity to either work on a submission to a health authority such as the FDA or the European Health Authority and then to get it approved. After that, I also worked on 2 additional drugs within the last several years. One was Symphony. We got that approved. I helped to lead that effort. When I say lead the effort, I mean coordinate the submission to the FDA and to the European health authorities. And then also I worked on Stelara for Crohn's disease. So when you talk about making a difference and having an impact, there are 5.5 million people around the globe that have inflammatory bowel disease. And because of the efforts of the teams with whom I worked, we were able to get these approved and make a difference in the lives of these patients. Now, you might say, so what do? I draw on my nursing skills every day in different ways. First of all, critical thinking and critical analysis is absolutely key. Because what I'm doing right now is I'm responsible for planning the development of the drug from concept up to and including approval. When I worked in GI, I focused largely on late approval, late development. Right now I'm working in early development. And when I talk about planning, we take a look at, and what we do is we plan out the timelines, the trials for the program, and in addition to that, we look at the drug supply. Will we have it? Will be it manufactured in time? What do we need? For those of you who are managing patients in acute care settings, whenever you plug in an IV tube, you're running those drugs through IV tubing, the IV bags filled with whatever the medication is. All of those things have to be tested to be sure that the drug is compatible with that tubing. And I can tell you from experience, it ain't easy. There are a lot of failures along the way in terms of trying to make sure that you have the safest product available to be able to administer your patients. I work with budgets. Clearly, I had fiscal management when I was in nursing leadership. My budgets are much larger now. I mean, one of my trials alone in late development was approximately $60 million. And we also have to ensure that these resources are utilized appropriately. So we critically analyze what are the issues, what do we need, and do we need that trial? Could we do it with fewer patients? I work with a cross-functional team, which includes manufacturing, drug supply, regulatory, data management, biostatisticians, physicians, data managers. It is a regulatory. It is a broad-based team in terms of trying to bring these drugs to market. And we analyze what are the risks, what are the issues that we have to do, and I help the team work through the mitigations for those risks. Now, I'm certainly not a scientist. I don't know all the answers, but I know how to ask the questions, and I also know when to ask the questions. That is really key. And I think that right now, in the last year, I moved from GI, and I'm now working in oncology, and I am humbled every day to know the people that I'm working with. They are so bright and so dedicated, I can hardly believe it. And the other benefit is I get to meet world medical leaders, global leaders, in whether when I was working in GI, was it Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis? Right now, world leaders in lung cancer. And the one project that I'm dedicated to right now, we are working on a cancer vaccine. Now, this is not a vaccine for treatment. It's a vaccine, not a vaccine for prevention. It is a vaccine for treatment. And it is a live bacteria that is attenuated, meaning it has been genetically modified to decrease its potency. But it takes a lot of courage to be able to inject immunosuppressed patients, sick oncology patients, with the live bacteria. It's early development. There are certainly challenges and issues. It may work, it may not, but we're working through the safety challenges with it. There are many issues as it relates to the drug supply. The drug has to be frozen. What are the implications of this? How long do you have to keep it to thaw out? And my nursing background is always called upon to be able to help figure out what are the issues and challenges. Lastly, I just want to say, Johnson & Johnson, again, I'm very lucky to be there. It is an amazing company. For those of you who may know, they are very nursing oriented. So they have a whole program devoted to nursing. There is, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, J&J has 128,000 employees globally. To give you some idea, the largest employer in the city of Philadelphia is the University of Pennsylvania. I think they have around 34,000, just in terms of scope. So the opportunity is vast. There are people with whom I have worked who have taken temporary assignments in Europe and or China. I've learned a lot about different cultures and different people. We work extremely closely with our Japanese affiliate. The regulations are always changing. So I would definitely say if you're interested in something that's very exciting, and if you don't need that immediate reward of when you take care of your patient or your group of patients, if you're more interested in taking care of really systems, patients, and making a difference, I think this is something that you should consider. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharon. I know the career fair is about to start, but does anyone have any questions for any of our speakers?
Will you be available afterwards to answer questions? Okay, because they have a limited time in terms of getting.
Yeah, I've got to get back to the office, so after this I have to leave, sorry.
Okay, no, but if there are any really burning questions, ask now. If not, you can see the others or email perhaps. Mrs. Keeney, okay?
Nursing? Oh. Was this overwhelming experience to start at the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. I mean, a major academic medical center. I think it was really learning the system. When I had gone to Villanova, it was certainly team-oriented in terms of working with teams, the team that took direct care of the patient, but you've got like so many other people that you are dependent on. I mean, you want to make sure that your transporter is there. You don't want that patient waiting around when they're uncomfortable to be able to get back to either their bed or their therapy. You know, working with the laboratories, those kinds of things. I mean, it is a broader experience, and you need to get to know that. But I know that you students know that now much better than I did when I graduated.
I think when you first get out of nursing school, the whole confidence thing, you're not sure. You're not sure, am I doing it right? Am I making the right decision? And that's going to come with time. And I would say you wouldn't be normal if you didn't have those questions like, oh my gosh, is this the right thing to do? So just think about what you learned and take it step by step, and you will come up with the right answers. And then you will gain the confidence, and those answers will come like this. So that's what I think as far as the biggest obstacle getting out of school.
And I'll just briefly say it's a big learning curve, and you just have to, I think the obstacle is just moving beyond that, applying yourself, working hard, and at some point you will find that you are prepared for that challenging patient that is crashing, and you don't need your books, you don't need your iPhone. You alone, because of all of the work you've put into it, can handle that situation. And it takes time. You won't be able to do that right away, but in due course you will.
Yeah, and I'll probably bounce off of what both of them just said. It's, you know, that confidence being on your own all of a sudden you don't have that instructor there to ask the questions to, but you guys are all really, really well prepared. So, you know, you get that support when you first graduate through a residency or a internship, or not an internship, but some type of mentoring preceptor type situation, and just kind of putting it all together into the area of nursing that you're starting your career in. Really, you know, putting all that knowledge together and applying it and just getting the confidence to be able to do it on your own.
I guess this would be a question more for John, but what do you think about the future of NP versus DNP and the future implications for that?
So I think that the future of the nurse practitioner, and especially the DNP, is a great move in terms of expanding on the clinical research and really using the evidence that's out there in applying it to practice. Right now, do I think I needed it when I started off as an NP? I think that's kind of a controversial question to answer, because certain academics will tell you absolutely and others maybe not so much. I certainly felt very prepared based off of my education to start off as an acute care NP. I do feel that it will strengthen us.
So I think we're running out of time. If you have any specific questions, feel free to come and ask them later. But I'd like to thank you all for coming today.